Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Welcome back, everyone. We are going to continue our talk with this gentleman about something that challenges many of us, and it's PTSD. And I said it before, I'll say it again. When we say those four letters, many times it's connected to the military, but not necessarily. It's a trauma that you're triggered by. And we're going to talk about that today, what you can do about it, some suggestions in terms of therapy, and lots more with a guy who started a great center for helping people. First of all, I want to talk about his book, and it's a workbook for anxiety, which comes along with everything that we are talking about. But he's also the guy behind Healthy Counseling Center. He's a coach there, and he created it. He's got a great team. Dr. Ray Smith is back with us today. Welcome back, Ray. How are you?
Well, I'm fine, thank you. I appreciate you asking. And I also want to agree with you that PTSD is sort of like when your car's low on gas. You never even noticed that there was a gas station on that corner before until the needle told you that you needed to do something about the gas. Well, I think PTSD is just kind of out of sight, out of mind until something happens that triggers, oh boy. I'll give a great example from the old days. Would be talking to a lady and she'd come in and say, I watched Oprah. I watched a woman on Oprah. What happened to her is what happened to me with Uncle Mark. And then she had repressed all of those traumatic memories from when she was a child. And I'd like to start with something a little more up to date. After we talked the last time, in the news was the story about a nice young couple with a nice little child and a nice family dog. For some reason, the dog attacked and killed the baby. And, you know, this was a beloved family pet. These were parents who were covered in their own scratches and blood trying to get the dog off of the child. Finally, when the police came, the only way to get the dog to release was to euthanize the dog. But that kind of horrific event, it was within hours of when we had talked. I can't imagine being that couple. I can't imagine losing my only child to a beloved family pet. And if they don't have nightmares reliving that, if seeing a child at the grocery store or seeing a dog down the street doesn't trigger that last horrific moment, you'd think, are you on drugs? How could you numb that? You know, that's just one of those things that if it doesn't knock your socks off, you're not paying attention. So I think I'd like to go a little more in depth. Several years ago, I put together a little outline of what is involved in PTSD so that we could be a little bit more precise. And maybe people who are watching or listening, oh, yeah, that happened to my granddad in World War II, or, oh, I remember after the car wreck, mom did such and such. So the symptoms of PTSD can be just as terrifying as watching your dog kill your child. They can be disabling. If either of those young people went to work the next day, I'd have to say why.
Wow.
From
I'm blown away by that story and can't even imagine, but it brings up some questions I think many of us think of. First of all, yeah, the trigger situation. After that, you could simply hear a dog bark.
Yes.
And right away you're there. Is PTSD typically suppressed until there's a trigger, or are there forms of it where it's kind of floating there, then it peaks up?
More like the second, because there are people that are bruised and battered immediately after a traumatic event. To be diagnosed with PTSD, it has to have gone on for a month. So a month from now, if they still avoid where the dog's bed was, or if a month from now they're still not going into the baby's room, then that's when the PTSD label. But I would think that later that afternoon, the man and his wife would both be highly symptomatic of having gone through a traumatic event. Now, you could say it's post-traumatic because it's after the policeman and the animal control people came and helped them. But I don't know how you could ever not see that or not hear your baby's dying cries. If you're not triggered, you're not paying attention. So the symptoms of PTSD that might even come later, like the lady I was talking about who saw something happen on Oprah and then had the repressed memories, but it's unwanted remembering and reliving those traumatic events. You may have upsetting memories of a traumatic event. Those memories can come back anytime when you're not expecting them. I worked with a little girl who had been sexually assaulted on a school bus. And the defense attorney was very shrewd and asked the little girl, well, what color is the school bus? Well, everybody knows school buses are yellow. And she said it was green. And case dismissed. Well, if you've ever looked at a school bus, the seats are green. And when her face was pressed up against green, she wasn't seeing the yellow outside. And so he went on to reoffend, and she went on to have flashbacks and would get physically sick waiting for a bus to school. And she would relive it with such intense feelings, fearful and helplessness, and really feeling very inadequate to deal with her trauma.
Unreal. And I know that the defense attorney has a job. We'll just move on from here.
Well, I'm an old Missouri redneck, and I think if he got incarcerated and Bubba in prison did unto him what he did unto the little girl, that's too much redneck philosophy.
Yeah.
But
anyway. How does that golden age rule? And that's come up, a number of times. People have talked about it out of nowhere these days, do unto others and ... And we'll just leave it there.
Well, it's supposed to be, I'm going to be kind to you because I'm hoping someday you'll be kind to me too. It's not supposed to be since I raped your daughter that you're going to be raping me as a consequence. One of the big factors in PTSD is avoidance, avoiding going to the places or being around the people, or like the couple I first mentioned, if they ever saw a loose dog from a leash, or they heard dogs fighting or heard children screaming, they would avoid that all that they could. But one of the problems, if you don't talk about it while you're awake, then your subconscious is kind enough to come and say, hey, what about that dog? And it is something you can't avoid. You're going to deal with it. Do you want to deal with it now and deal with it well, or do you want to have it impact all of your relationships and every night's sleep that you should have been getting? So the question is, yeah, you want to avoid it, but when do you want to heal it? And if not now, then when? The other problem with PTSD is people becoming numb. So probably during the first hours of shock for that young couple, well, how are you doing? Or are you really angry? Or do you feel inadequate you couldn't save? Or no, I'm okay. And that really isn't a lie. They have numbed themselves because to feel that hurt and fear and helplessness, no, I want to be numb. And
is that a self-protection mode?
Absolutely. This afternoon, all the taverns along this division street I work on are going to be full with people who are drowning their sorrows. they want to be numb. They don't want to feel what they, in my opinion, should be feeling and working through. But yes, if you've got a needle in your arm, there is a reason for that. And what are you going to get high from? Not the substance, but what is it that is so bad I'd rather put a AIDS and hepatitis needle in my arm than go talk with somebody about it that could help me erase it. The numb stuff keeps you isolated from other people. And when you try to be numb and not hurt, the bad news is you don't feel the good feelings either. So at Thanksgiving, this young couple, they are probably not going to feel grateful. They are probably going to look over there where the high chair was, and there's not a baby there, and they are not going to want to feel anything. They're going to want to be numb. Maybe next Thanksgiving, they'll be glad for the time they did have with their child, or maybe the one after that, they'd be glad for the time that they had for their family dog. But numb and avoidance are better than, well, it's the three monkeys thing. I don't want to look at it. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to talk about it. And then the last one is hyperarousal, hypervigilance, because most people with PTSD have difficulty sleeping. They have underlying anger that just bursts up and is irritability that's just gone haywire. Most people with PTSD have a lot of trouble concentrating because, well, for example, if that couple is trying to talk with their insurance man about what we do, they may find themselves drifting off in some way because it's too unpleasant to think about putting this battered body in a box underground, you know? And so they have difficulty concentrating on the busyness of what has to happen. And if you are the trauma survivor, you still have questions about your safety. So there's lots of things that change in our behavior and our personality when we've gone through the trauma. And I hope that it will be helpful, but I'd like to go through a list of symptoms of PTSD. And again, it's like seeing the gas station. Oh, well, now I know that there's a gas station on that corner. I never paid attention to it before, but now that I need gas. Well, I think the same thing. Some of these symptoms that people have, oh, I didn't know that was PTSD. My favorite example is if you and I go out tonight and we see those little white lights in the sky, we'll know that those are stars. But an astronomer goes out there and he sees Cassiopeia and Orion's belt and the Big Dipper, and those lights mean something different. Well, same with these symptoms of anxiety. I am not cruel. I'm not going to talk about this in any attempt to worsen somebody's condition, but recognition is job one. If you can be aware that there is something that's happened to me that's still happening in some ways, then I can do something about it. So if you'll indulge me, I'll just review these. And if people are watching or listening, just want to put a little check mark. Hopefully they won't have any of these. Hopefully if they have any, it'll just be one and it'll be very small. But what I would suggest, I don't know, there's 10 or 20 of them. Just if you have this, then 0 to 5. I don't have it at all, or I have it as worst as it could possibly be at 5. So I'll just give you the first one. Intrusive thoughts and images. Does that ever happen to you? 0, no, never. 3, sometimes. 5, I've been debilitated sometimes.
How do you define intrusive thoughts?
Ones that you don't want to have. So, for example, if tonight that couple with the baby, they go to sleep, but they can't because this thought, what else could I have done, comes into their mind. And it's very difficult to be powerless. So that would be an intrusive thought example.
Gotcha.
Well, let's go through the rest of them. Disturbing dreams. So you and I would call those nightmares. When I have a dream, it's about having dinner with some of my relatives that have been dead for 40 or 50 years, you know, but that's not a disturbing dream. That's just like how we were in real life. So disturbing dreams. 0, never. 5, they're terrible and happen all the time. Flashbacks of the trauma are very much like the dreams. It's happening as if it's happening all over right now. And some of the flashbacks from trauma are triggered by things. Sometimes it's a smell. Sometimes it's a sound. Sometimes it's a texture. I've talked with massage therapists that are giving a massage to somebody and they just jump up out of the bed because they're having a flashback about the last time somebody had them by the neck. It wasn't relaxing and it wasn't massage. So that would be an example of a flashback being a 5. Reminders of the trauma bring distress. So, for example, if grandma died on Thanksgiving, now we've got this coming up, and the reminders of losing her are kind of offsetting being grateful for our country or the people who risked their lives to come here and establish this country. So those reminders might be 4 or 5 that I don't want any turkey or pie. You know, I just want to cry again about grandma. Shakes, sweats, heart racing are physical symptoms of PTSD. Sometimes it would feel like, well, let's go back to my example of that couple. They were trying to pull that dog off of the child. They were sweating. They were shaking. Their heart was racing. They were doing everything they could physically to stop this. So that would be a 5. To avoid talking about the trauma, my dad, my uncles, the other men that came back from World War II, they didn't talk about what happened over there. There was a code of silence. I think they got it on the ships as they were coming home for a week or two. I think they listened to each other once and said, let's put this in a box and bury it. And they never talked about the trauma. Avoiding trauma places and people. So, for example, if someone lost somebody in the 9/11 attack, they don't want to go to New York. They want to avoid it. Some people have some amnesia about the trauma. They just can't bear to look at it. And so they put it out of sight, out of mind. And, oh, I forgot about the part where the policeman killed the dog. Well, that's amnesia from the trauma. Withdrawal from activities. We want to isolate because we don't want to have somebody say, how are you doing? And, well, I'm thinking about grandma dying at Thanksgiving. You know, you want to avoid those conversations, not those people. I want to withdraw. And there may be, like this young couple, it may be years before they go to Thanksgiving or Christmas or other holiday events with people. And part of that may be stinking thinking that, you know, I'm ashamed because I couldn't protect my child. Well, nobody sitting around that Thanksgiving table is judging and criticizing. They're just grieving with you. Feeling detached from other people is almost like you're dissociated. You live in New York. So if you're taking a road trip in the fall to go up to Vermont and see the leaves, well, on the highway sometimes, have you kind of zoned out and then all of a sudden awaken and there's the exit? Well, you know you were in the car. You know it couldn't have gotten to that place without you behind the wheel, but you didn't notice all of the stops that were available between there because your mind was somewhere else. Well, that's a dissociative episode. So, for example, next summer when that husband is mowing the front yard, he probably will go up in the tree and look at the nests of birds and things like that, because it isn't safe to be down on the ground where that happened and mowing the grass over that spot that's got his child's blood on it. Another is pessimism regarding the future. I was just talking with a vet right before we got together, and he knows that he will never be physically well. This past week, he's been triggered by something he doesn't even know what it was, but he's pretty pessimistic about the future. Sleep patterns being abnormal. Well, you can imagine if you were that couple that lost the dog, you're not going to go to bed and have 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep. Irritability comes with it, especially in a time like that where I was helpless. I was hopeless. I couldn't do anything to make this situation stop. Well, you're going to be ticked. And it might leak out. A lot of times when a couple loses a child, it ends their marriage because, well, it was your fault for letting the dog out. No, it's your fault for letting the child out, or you're not holding me when I grieve, or you're avoiding talking about it. And a lot of marriages can't withstand that kind of trauma. So for them, I'm sure that's a 5. Poor concentration is partly due because if I'm thinking about what happened to my classmates in Vietnam, I'm probably not going to be noticing what kind of headphones you're wearing. I won't be present.
Does that happen? And I don't mean to cut you off. I'm just curious. Is that call it brain fog?
Yeah.
Does it waver, or is it just constantly in a fog?
Well, actually, it does waver. And sometimes there's such a fog that I couldn't even pay attention about what we were talking about. But sometimes it goes into hyperfocus where, well, let's pick on the video gamers. They can be so focused on getting to the next level that the house could be burning down around them and they wouldn't notice until the electricity went off. So the poor concentration can be a defense against, if I think about that dog one more time, no, I don't want to concentrate on that. But on the other hand, if I hyperfocus and now I'm going to go to the crisis nursery and I'm going to help with other babies. Okay. So they have figured out a way to not concentrate on theirs, but to do something that would help them turn tragedy into some silver lining. Same thing with being on edge or easily startled. And that can happen, well, again, especially with our veterans, when a car backfires or 4th of July firecrackers or something, and they are right back in Iraq or Afghanistan. The sad and guilty feelings that come, there's a survivor's guilt. So I have a patient that had several TBIs when he was in Iraq, and he lived through it, barely, but some of his teammates didn't. And he feels sad for their loss, but he also feels guilty. What else could I have done? How else could I have led my team differently? And you and I would call that false guilt, because obviously he did everything that he could do. But anyway, they have those feelings. Alcohol and drug use could just be throwing one back with the boys, or it could be full on meth addiction, but it's that same effort to numb. And I don't want to feel, I don't want to think about what happened. I want to numb it with something. And a lot of times that shows up in conflict with others, but it can also be conflict with you. I'm a no good Nick because I saw this trauma and I couldn't stop it, or whatever else. I have a patient with his trauma is about being part of the ordnance disposal, like you see on TV, the IEDs that they would go out and try and keep the soldiers from getting blown up by finding those landmine kind of things. And his conflict is with himself. Who else could I have saved? What else could I have prevented from happening? So it's trying to go back in time and deal with the trauma. And the last one on the list, 0 to 5, is violence. Use police as an example. There's a special law here in Washington State for domestic violence involving police officers, because they've got the weapons, they've got the training. If they were involved in a shooting yesterday, and they come home and the wife has not got the children in bed quietly, and then boom, there's all this violence, and don't you care at all? Don't you know what I've been going through? And there's too much reactivity. And a lot of those guys suffer in silence, and so the number on that would be 0. But they're also the ones that go to prison because the answer was 5. So that's kind of a laundry list of the symptoms of PTSD that don't have to control your future. Yes, something happened. Yes, it was tragic, and it can come to a conclusion. How are we doing on time? I'm going on and on here.
We're out of time, and
Okay.
I want to describe fantastic list, and I don't mean it in that way, but
Yeah.
it really addresses everything and makes you think. And I also wonder, are there people that are possibly suffering from PTSD and not even knowing what the actual event was?
Well, and that's why this fellow I was talking to this morning had those 4 nights where he had triggers, but he doesn't even know what they were.
Right.
We'll get into the EFT tapping next time about PTSD, but I've also come up with a special coaching program. Psychotherapy is about trying to heal the past. Coaching is about seeing what's going on now and where you want to be going. And so I have come up with this program. It's a post-traumatic stress disorder coaching program, 3-month PEACE system. And the name of it is Dr. Ray, Please Take Away Self-Destruction. So PTSD, Please Take Away Self-Destruction. And it is a 3-month program that walks people through finishing up what was going on there, what they're doing now, and where they want to go, and what tools they need to get them there, and the kind of support that they need, and sometimes accountability they need. So that's not psychotherapy, that's a coaching program. So if that would be of service to somebody, call a number 509-466-6632 or the email drray@drraysmith.com. And we have resources, we have tools, but we would feel like a gas station. Don't people realize that they're on E? They need to pull in here and they need to get some help. And maybe a gas station refill is a poor analogy. But my point is, if you haven't noticed any of those symptoms that we went over, wow, I didn't realize that they're all 4s and 5s, then let's do something about it.
Thank you
There
so
is
much.
hope. Oh,
There
you're
is,
welcome.
and I've never experienced anybody like you, right? That gets to the core of it, makes it easy to understand, and also offers hope. Like, you are okay. You are normal. We all could suffer from the same exact thing that somebody else is suffering from.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for the compliment. I am passionate about preventing and healing relationship problems, especially relationships with a person in the mirror. And if you've been through trauma and you haven't been able to master it alone, ask for help. If not from me, somebody on your insurance plan to do therapy, or a vet center if you're a veteran. There's hope out there. There's help out there. There is healing. This is not something that has to ruin the rest of your life.
Amen. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for having me to do this. I want to broaden my services, and just like that couple I talked about, if I could lessen the burden and suffering of somebody like that, then I feel like I'm living on purpose.
And what a life to live when you know that you can help people that are struggling over, and it doesn't matter what it is. And
No.
many of us are struggling and might not realize the severity of it. But hope and help is there. And Ray, thank you again for being here. Appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome. And thank you for having the guts to listen to these horror stories. But the suffering is real, and the possibility of doing something about it is real.
Looking forward next time we talk.
Me too. Thanks again.
We'll be right back.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.